Just like Duke Ellington says, there's only two kinds of music, good and bad. And Fleetwood Mac was good music.
Fleetwood Mac have had more dysfunctional people in that band than possibly any other band in rock history.
I might not give the answer that you want me to.
They'll always have a huge fan base with Fleetwood Mac for that mid-70s period, I think even more so than the original period. And they'll be able to go out and continue playing live and playing those songs for as long as they want, I'm sure of that.
When you think of Fleetwood Mac, you don't really think of Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac anymore, although the shadow of that group is undeniably there.
I see them as a succession of groups with the same name, except the rhythm section, which is, I think, probably unique in pop history.
When the critics and the audiences agree that something's very good, it's got to be very good. So the group we're talking about is Fleetwood Mac, and they play the blues. You can see them doing these songs. So, ladies and gentlemen, Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac were a guitar-based blues rock band from the start. They formed in 1967. They had, so to speak, graduated from John Mayall's Blues Breakers, which was the #1 school of British blues rockers. John Mayall was a second division talent himself, but a first division band leader. He had great people coming through the ranks. He always taught them something, but they never really stayed because there'd always be an ego clash sooner or later. Is that John Mayall couldn't stand for very long. I think it's fair to say somebody in the band who was obviously more talented than himself.
I believe it was Peter Green's birthday, and John Mayall gave him a present of some free studio time. And he used this studio time to cut some blues tracks with McVie on bass and Fleetwood on drums. And they liked what they'd done, so Green decided to leave Mayall and form a group with the other two. McVie at first didn't want to join because he thought that playing with John Mayall was a steadier gig and regular money, and so he declined. But he managed to persuade Fleetwood to come with him because Fleetwood was fed up at the rules and regulations in the Blues Breakers. And I found another guitar player, Jeremy Spencer, and they got a bass player called Bob Brunning.
John McVie had a good regular monthly income from John Mayall. Very safe band, nice work, a good band. And he said, no, I'm not quitting. No. So Peter put the ad in desperation because he got these things booked and he needed someone. And so I scoured the ad, saw this advert in the Melody Maker, which was a very famous music publication at the time. And it just said, bass player wanted for Chicago Blues Band. I thought, well, that'll do. So I rang up, went along to the audition, and walked into this little council flat in Richmond and fumbled my way through the audition. Just about managed, because at the end, Peter Green said, yeah, all right, you'll do, you're in. So I was temporary. And I knew that right from the start. He was very straightforward. Said, I want, John McVie, but so if you're happy with that situation, then fine. And so inevitably, Fleetwood Mac took off like a rocket. John McVie soon discovered that rather than stay with the rather sort of ploddy John Mayall, he'd like to be in on this rather new, rather more exciting. So they met at a wedding, and John said, well, if it's all right with you, I'd like to actually join. Well, that was it. So So Peter sort of very apologetically said, "Sorry, Bob, but I understood."
When Fleetwood Mac form, and they have their name because of Mick Fleetwood, and the Mac is actually an initial enticement for John McVie to join the group, because at first he actually was staying with John Mayall, and they got in this guy Bob Brunning, a friend, to play bass on the first dates, and they debut at the Windsor Jazz Festival in August 1967, but John McVie very quickly comes in, and they're an archetypal English white blues, in quote, group of the time, which means that they play lots of 12-bar blues, lots of Elmore James stuff, lots of Muddy Waters rip-off, and they're really exciting.
Tried to be a very authentic blues band to start with. They didn't want to be a blues rock band or a rhythm and blues band. They wanted to be purely a blues band. Green was a very gentle guitar player. He was a very unassuming man and a very fragile guitar player. A lot of guitar players were all over everywhere, trying to show off. He was just the opposite. He knew what to leave out. I think that's the best way of saying it. So he played an absolute minimum for a lead guitarist, but what he played was just spot on perfect. Really tasteful sort of guy.
A real buzz had been going around that part of the industry about Peter Green because he was simply so good. And the producer Mike Vernon, a legendary producer in the 60s, still going strong now, it said, well, look, let's try and get a deal with Decca, a very big label in the 60s. But in the end, they decided they had some difficulties in getting a proper deal. So they said, hang it, let's form our own record label, and let's call it Blue Horizon. So Blue Horizon was born, and the first major band was, of course, Fleetwood Mac.
So Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's band, but named after the rhythm section. They were a straight blues rock band. Their first album was cut in 3 days. A couple of tunes are credited to Peter Green, but they're pretty much adaptations of blues tunes. And that album sat in the UK charts for a year in 1968, and they became one of the biggest draws on the live circuit. Jeremy Spencer was the second guitarist, very into the slide blues guitar player Elmore James. Did he have more to offer? Yes. He was an Elvis Presley obsessive. He did a good Elvis impression, which went down very well live.
Well, he seemed kind of in a world of his own, because everybody else was going dun 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 dun, and he was going da 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 da. They were physically a remarkably ill-matched band by virtue of his presence and Mick Fleetwood's. I mean, I was watching on YouTube the other night an old video of the original lineup, and the interesting thing is that Jeremy Spencer is literally the same height as Mick Fleetwood, with Mick Fleetwood seated behind his drums. So he must have been about 3 feet tall.
It was so interesting to see a band with two such sort of contrasting styles of playing with it, and yet they're complementary. And Peter was always a very good sideman, and so was Jeremy. So when it was Peter's solo, Jeremy would play very sensitively behind him. They didn't try and bash each other off stage. They enjoyed supporting each other musically. It worked very well indeed. I got a guy that lives up on a hill. I got a guy
first album, and indeed the first two albums that Green won, were absolute classics at the time. And this was just a time when it was the blues boom in London, and so their timing was perfect. And they had Mike Vernon, who was a very good producer, to produce them. And there were a lot of classic recordings, I think, on those first two albums.
The first two records, Fleetwood Mac and Mr. Wonderful, are kind of in a sort of white blues tradition. Relatively undistinguished, actually, although they sold well. They're on the Blue Horizon label, which is sort of significant, which is formed by a guy called Mike Vernon, and it's really a blue. It is, as it suggests, it's a blues label.
The record came out on Blue Horizon, then CBS later, and it was simply called Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, because although Peter was very self-effacing, Mike Vernon said, well, let's not go too far. You're a big name, and it's got to be called Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. And that's famously known as the Dog and Dustbin album, because it's got a picture on the front of Peter Green's girlfriend's dog peeing on a dustbin. Very charming, but, you know, very bluesy. And that's a very nice album, still stands up very well today.
I got a gal and she just won't be true. I got a gal and she just won't be true. I won't let her do the one good thing I tell her to. She won't shake her money maker, won't shake her money maker, won't shake her money maker. She won't shake her money maker, won't shake her money maker. She won't.
I think the first great rock and roll song that Fleetwood Mac did was Shake Your Moneymaker, which was the standout track from the first album, for my money. But just because it was a great rock and roll track. I mean, you know, Eat Your Heart Out, Chuck Berry. It was as good as that. It was really rattling along rock and roll song.
For some curious reason, this funny, obscure little blues record actually was voted the best album of the year. And it, not only that, it for a while it was outselling the Beatles and the Stones. It says something worked with it, and people did actually buy it. Peter Green wrote a beautiful song called Black Magic Woman. It was about a woman who could sort of cast spells, and a spellbinding, attractive woman, and so on. It was a beautifully constructed song. He sang it extremely well. Not many people know that Fleetwood Mac actually recorded it, although, I mean, any greatest hits collection these days will always have Black Magic Woman on it, so probably more people know these days. But what happened, of course, was that a very famous American band called Santana then promptly recorded Black Magic Woman, and they did do a superb job of it, no question of it.
I think most people associate Black Magic Woman with Santana, of course, because they covered it, and their version was probably sexier. The Fleetwood Mac version was fine and dandy, you know, especially towards the end when it speeded up, and it was a really good song. But Carlos Santana brought this kind of Latin feel to it, which was the whole raison d'etre of Santana was Latin music. He just made it into a better dance track, really, something that you could tap your feet to. So it's more associated with him. And of course, he still plays it as Santana now. But it was a real good song.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
Got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman. I've got a black magic woman. Got me so blind I can't see. That she's a black magic woman. She tried to make a devil out of me.
I have a slight preference for the original, but then I really love the cover too. There is a fantastic version of the Little Willie John song, Need Your Love So Bad, on Mr. Wonderful. Those are the two best tracks off it. Very successful album, but like pretty much all of Fleetwood Mac's albums, even including their third album, Then Play On, right up until the Buckingham Nicks era, they never made a wholly consistently good record. In the Peter Green era, there were some fantastic highs, but there was also stuff which was less good, and this was partially down to the fact that as a band they operated in a fairly kind of loose and open way. This was a hippie era, you've got to remember. This was the era where bands could be much more like communes than the kind of very tightly functional chemistry that you would have got earlier on in the 60s with a group, or later on, say, in the punk era, where you had tight 4 or 5 pieces and it was like a gang and everybody did their certain thing and there wasn't a kind of fluidity of personnel or contribution.
In about 1970, Peter Green spotted a band that he liked that featured a very young guitar player, kid out of school, called Danny Kerwin. And Danny Kerwin was a very, very fine player. A bit like Jeremy Spencer before him, had played in a band in which really he was the outstanding member. So Peter tried to sort of put a band around him, but it didn't work. They auditioned a few people and so on. It didn't work. And so finally, Peter Green said, right, we'll just join Fleetwood Mac then. So he's rather pleased at that, I think.
He was a blues rock player, but he had, if you like, a sense of Californian harmony as well. It wasn't unlike Led Zeppelin being founded at the same time, where Robert Plant, he had a strong hippie influence. He was interested in people like Buffalo Springfield and Moby Grape, and that is the idea of harmony, singing, different kind of structures. They weren't purists. They loved the blues, but they also loved the Everly Brothers. So they loved Bob Dylan, folk music. It's, it was all pouring in there.
He was incredibly universal. He could put his hand to most any style. And the classic one, it was a B-side to one of the very successful singles, Jigsaw Puzzle Blues. It's really eloquent, really mature stuff for such a young guitarist.
Peter Green, I think, wanted to expand the band. I mean, Albatross is not really blues, is he? So I think he wanted to bring in a songwriter who wasn't so steeped in the blues, like Spencer was completely steeped in the blues with his Elmore James influence. And that's why they brought him again. And I think he wanted to share the guitar duties. I think he wanted 3 of them.
It's very rare that an instrumental number finds its way to the very top of the hit parade, but this song called Albatross did, and the group I'm sure you know, Fleetwood Mac.
They started working, rehearsing together, and they came up with this curious piece. We now know it's a beautiful piece called Albatross. But when we remind ourselves that Fleetwood Mac were a hard-driving blues band, Albatross really didn't sort of fit. It was like Santo and Johnny meets the Shadows or something. But a lovely piece. And Mick Fleetwood and John McVie just laughed at it. I said, this is ridiculous, this is going to do nothing for us at all. We'll go along with it, but really. And they bet him, I think, a couple of £100 that it wouldn't make the top 50 something. And, OK, I'll take your bet, said Peter. Of course, next thing is at number 1. And they have to rather happily shell out. It's funny, I remember at the time Peter was in New York when Albatross went to number 1. They were doing a tour, and he sent me a postcard from New York saying, Oh, it's miserable here. You don't want to be in New York on Christmas Eve. Well, I'd imagine it would be a nice place to be, but he said it's cold, it's snowing, fed up. He said, Bob, anyway, never mind. Thanks for buying the worst copies of Albatross on our behalf. So, but it's a beautiful song.
Peter Green was always a kind of a mystical guy, and he'd read about the myth of the albatross with ancient sailors, because the myth was that if you killed an albatross, then your ship would be becalmed, and if it was becalmed, you'd run out of drink, so fresh water supplies, and you would all die. And that was the famous albatross. Was it the ancient manager Coleridge, I think, a poet, wrote that? He'd read that, and that's what inspired him to call it Albatross. But it's a beautiful track because of the separation. There's two guitars, of course. Green plays the main guitar, but there's the second guitar echoing his phrases in the background on the other channel in your other ear, which is Spencer playing it. It's really beautiful. I'd never get fed up of listening to that song.
It is one of the most amazingly soulful, hypnotic, entrancing, beguiling, bewitching records. It's got this fantastic pulse to it. And that's John McVie's bass. The bass line has got that, if you like, that repetitive but completely beguiling quality that something like Ravel's Bolero has. It's cyclical. It goes round and round on itself, but you just get sucked into it. It was without any vocals at all. It was a great soulful instrumental. Instrumentals don't tend to be big hits, but this was a number one.
It was a bit of a surprise because it's an instrumental. It doesn't really seem to fit in with these kind of, roustering, 12-bar blues gigs that you've seen. You're pleased for Fleetwood Mac because it's a big hit, but it also signals kind of another direction, a sort of softer direction indeed, which is what is about to come.
Then Play On is it's an album which should be better known, but it doesn't help that it actually came out in two different versions, a US and a UK, and it's been reissued with all sorts of jiggery pokery and edits changed and track orders changed and things like that. So it's not fixed as an album in the same way that albums like Led Zeppelin 1 or 2 or Let It Bleed, which came out in the same year, are kind of fixed because we know every note from the first to the last. There are some great songs on it. Even the songs that aren't so fantastic aren't too bad. The best songs, of course, are Peter Green songs. It's not quite a best of Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, but it's close enough.
It is simply an extremely good album. It's got good songs. It's well made. The band, that version of the band, were playing well. It wasn't that well received, actually, at the time, or certainly not in all quarters, and the band weren't all that pleased with it. They felt it was a bit bitty, didn't quite have a very clear message. But it is a very, very nice album.
Is a pretty varied album and was a really big album at the time. And you mustn't forget that by this time, this is the end of the 60s, by this time Fleetwood Mac really are the biggest group in Europe. It hasn't really translated to the United States, but they're absolutely huge. And one of the points about Then Play On is it has a very long version. It's about 8 or 9 minutes long of what became a big hit single, which was the tune Oh Well, which they'd been playing live for some time and continued to play live in further incarnations of Fleetwood Mac till 1997. And it's a kind of sort of half-spoken, it's vaguely bluesish tune, but it's very addictive.
Not quite the last, but almost the final great contribution that Peter Green made to the group was "Oh Well," which was in 2 parts. The first part was a fine rock song in itself, but it was the second part, the Spanish guitar part, that to me sounded like the soundtrack to a spaghetti western. It really did. It was a beautiful piece of music to put on a single. That's really unusual for a group, and it just demonstrated what a fantastic guitar player it was.
I can't help about the shape I'm in. I can't sing, I ain't pretty, and my legs are thin. But don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer that you want me to.
Peter Green started off as a blues purist, but as he developed as a songwriter, is that he began to pour more and more of himself into the songs, which is why you have, in 1969, these fantastically personal records like "Oh Well," "Man of the World," and then when he got involved, in acid, is when he got the LSD Horrors, the Green Manalishi with a 3-pronged horn, which is as scary a song as you've ever heard in your life. Was that a blues song? Well, you could hear the kind of the blues roots in its structure and some of its kind of, if you like, some of the licks. But it was a rock song, in the same way as "Whole Lotta Love" by Led Zeppelin was a rock song, though you could hear the ancestral voices of the blues in there as well.
Green Manalishi is a great tune. I mean, it's got it's got fantastic dynamics in it. It's not, in a funny way, it's not that dissimilar to "Oh Well" in this kind of structuring of the song, actually. But it came at a crucial and cathartic moment for Peter Green, because he wrote it in Munich in Germany, not long after having been spiked with acid. And Peter Green is already suffering from perhaps, you have to say, serious mental problems. I mean, he's very confused about his status. That's partially because of that underground thing, whereas, you weren't supposed to make money out of it. He wants to give away all of the group's money. They're not so pleased about this, really. So essentially, he leaves the group.
The Then Play On album, I think, is remembered most of all because it was the last contribution that Peter Green made to the group before he became a recluse, more or less. I mean, his contribution to the group was incredible. There would never have been a Fleetwood Mac if it wasn't for him. It should have been called Fleetwood Green, as far as I'm concerned. His departure. It's remarkable that they managed to carry on.
One of the reasons that is held in such particular regard is that though nobody knew it at the time, that's the last we would hear of his genius. It's a bit like Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd. Nobody knew it at the time, but that was the first and the last we would hear of Syd Barrett's genius. Kiln House, their 4th album, was the first one without Peter Green. Peter Green had been the centre of the band, and so obviously that when the centre drops out, what's going to fill the space?
Well, they always had the good old impeccable rhythm section. I mean, if there's a Fleetwood Mac sound, it's actually John McVie and Mick Fleetwood, very much. Kiln House was a sort of pretty album, and it was an attempt to write some interesting, quite melodic and sort of folky songs almost. And once again, it works very well indeed. I can't put my finger on particular tracks that I would say are outstanding for me. But once again, good songs, very well performed.
Kiln House is kind of the first record that they make that is in the direction that Danny Kerwin's addition to the group had indicated they might go. It's kind of more soft rock, really. It's kind of veering towards a Californian kind of sound. And in fact, through the next series of records, they're kind of heading more progressively in that direction consistently.
They left the blues, right? And they didn't know whether to be a rock band, they didn't know whether to be a blues band, they didn't know whether to be an R&B band. They hadn't yet got the songwriting that would characterize the later band. The one factor, I think held them together was recruiting Christine Perfect, or Christine McVie as she became. She brought, as far as I could tell anyway, just as an observer from a music writer's point of view, I think she brought a sort of real stability to the situation, because the men she was surrounded by were unstable, and it was the characteristic of the group for the men to be fairly unstable. But Christine McVie, whom I met once or twice in that time, she always struck me as being a sensible girl who had her feet planted firmly on the ground. She had a beautiful voice as well, and as it turned out, she was an immensely talented songwriter and a great keyboard player. But that's beside the point. You know, there's probably a lot of this. She brought this stability to the lineup.
Christine McVie is a great keyboards player. And also she has a fabulous, really rather sultry voice. It's quite a deep voice actually for a woman. And it adds another element totally, because this is up till then this is a group of blokes, definitely. These are definitely blokes in Fleetwood Mac. And clearly she brings another element to it. It probably softens them in the way that they were already being softened by the addition of Danny Coleman.
They started moving towards, if you like, the blueprint that had been laid down a few years beforehand in San Francisco by Jefferson Airplane, which is to say a very strong female voice, not a completely dominating one, because also you had songs written by and performed by men too. But a lot of the aggression of the band under Peter Green went. It also ceased to be a band where you waited with breathless anticipation for the guitar solos. So it lost a little bit of its identity. It lost a little bit of what made it special.
Jeremy Spencer is like Mr. Rock and Roll in Fleetwood Mac. He does these, he does these rock and roll medleys towards the end of the set. Sometimes he appears on stage with his hair all greased back in a teddy boy outfit. So he seems quite an interesting bloke. So it's a bit of a surprise in January 1971, when they've just gone over on an American tour there in LA, when he pops out to buy a magazine, he says, and that's it. That's the last they ever see of him. And he, in fact, has been inveigled on his trip to the store, has been inveigled into joining the Children of God, sort of a born-again Christian group, and that's it, man. He's gone.
After one of the many dramatic departures of a Fleetwood Mac member, the band got to hear of a very good American guitar player, and as it's transpired, a writer called Bob Welsh, who played in all sorts of bands on the West Coast, and was an experienced player.
They asked Bob Welsh without having heard a note. They didn't audition him. And it worked. It worked for some years. A talented man, but not a super talent, not a hugely commanding, charismatic personality.
Wherever there was a kind of weakness, if there was something flagging on stage, you'd kind of like cover it guitar-wise, vocally. In the studio, perhaps not so much with my input, but like Christine and Mick, who was like the governor, they'd kind of sussed there might be a little sagging in the continuity of an album, and say, well, we need something a bit more up to. And Bob would just disappear with his A4, sheet of paper and pen, come back hours later, a day later, and boom, he'd be there. Very, very good, real trooper.
talk about Fleetwood Mac in this particular period as the transition years. That is, they had stopped being a blues rock band, although they still had elements of that because they still had an audience which expected that, and that's because that's what they'd been schooled in. And they didn't even slowly fade away from that. When they recruited, for example, a couple of guys from Savoy Brown and Bob Weston, who then made the mistake of having an affair with Mick Fleetwood's wife. They got themselves a little bit bluesier and boogier again in about 1972-3.
All those records, Bare Trees, Future Games, and later Heroes Are Hard to Find, Penguin, they all sort of blur into one, really, and they're kind of a bit indistinguishable. They're okay, but they're not really doing anything. They're not doing very much. But what they kind of fitted very adequately American FM rock. And so increasingly Fleetwood Mac are touring there. They're kind of there most of the time. They've almost lost their audience in Britain and in Europe.
They were very established in America. They were doing what they call the college circuit, concert houses, and their old standbys like the Academy of Music in New York, which I thought, this sounds very intellectual and wonderful. But in fact, it was this downtown, real funky old theatre. It was fantastic. It was the real heart of New York. So they had their venues mapped out, but I suppose the lion's share of the touring would be attributed to the college, the campus circuit. The students were very into the Fleetwood Mac music, and they accepted the new, the new at the time Fleetwood Mac, i.e. Dave Walker and myself. It went very well. They were starting to get a bit jaded with this continuum, because it was tending to go in a circle rather than a progressive line, and I could see the founder members getting a bit like, oof. Down to Heathrow, Mick had his two little kiddies with his wife Jenny, and one was a babe in arms, and they were going over to America on the tour. There was families, it's not just the musicians anymore. And it didn't really seem to be going anywhere except on and on and on. And there was dissension within the ranks. Bob was making grumbling noises, saying that he wanted to go solo. So he'd done it for a while and tried very hard. John and Christine were, 24 hours a day, husband and wife team, on stage, off stage, hotels. It's enough for anybody. So there was cracks appearing, that's what I'm saying. It came to a head. I and Mick's wife at the time, Jenny, we were the very best of friends. It was like at the time, it was rather like a spiritual empathy, because if you believe in, from an astrologic point of view, we were born within an hour of each other. There's that kind of closeness, and we always communicated very well, and probably misread the language. We had a very brief affair. So I kind of became the dumping ground for everyone else's angst. Suddenly that all dissipated. No, it's not us, it's him. So I took the can for that to a greater degree, I feel. Some might want to disagree with that, I don't know. But I think that basically was it. So halfway through the tour, the whole thing blew up. I was given my marching orders, ticket back to London, and that was it. It was all over very, very abruptly.
I think it was in 1973, the band was at a low ebb. They'd just lost Bob Weston, and so Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and Christine Perfect had to go and tell their manager that unfortunately they were unable to compete or at least undertake an American tour that he'd booked. And the manager was distressed by this news, and clearly this tour might well have generated healthy revenue for him. And so instead of sort of cancelling the dates, he decided to recruit a bogus Fleetwood Mac of second division blues players from England, who I think some of whom had played in a group called Elmer Gantry. Anyway, so out they went. They called themselves Fleetwood Mac, and they did Fleetwood Mac cover versions on about half a dozen gigs in America before the fans and the real Fleetwood Mac rumbled what was going on. And it was a scandal, really, at the time.
The remaining few, which was Christine, John McVie and Mick, wasn't it, really? It was do or die, and I think they consolidated what they had, and then they decided to go to America. Big decision, because they could have disappeared between the gaps, couldn't they, so easily. But fortunately, as we know, it turned out to be a lot bigger than anyone imagined.
I remember Mick Fleetwood actually saying to me, well, we'd been sitting in sort of the Hyatt House, you know, for years, every so often in LA, you know, eating our steaks and mushrooms, and suddenly we decided that we actually ought to try living there because we were there so much, and it seemed to be more economical. And their sound was very much attuned to Southern California at that point. So it starts to make sense, and it makes even more sense when Mick Fleetwood is checking out some studio in the valley, and someone plays him, you know, a tape of a record by this couple, Lindsey, Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and he loves it, and again just hires them on the spot like he had with Bob Welch. I mean, they don't really try out with the group, and of course this is, you know, the beginning of their most successful period, and it's that kind of Anglo-American fusion, I think, that was also involved in that, what became huge commercial success.
Once again, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie had found superb songwriters in the shape of those two, and of course they became absolutely enormous, and they did a couple of things before they did the what's commonly known as the White Album, and once again I'm conscious of repeating myself a bit, but really, once again, the White Album did very well because it was just so good. Excellent songs written by Stevie and Lindsey. And so that did well, did extremely well in the States, really. That was their first really big selling album in the States. It really sold bucket loads.
The album that they put together, called just Fleetwood Mac. Some people call the White Album because it's got a basically white sleeve with a very tall picture of Mick Fleetwood and a very short, chopped off at the knees, John McVie. Was basically the stuff that they'd been writing for Buckingham Nicks, jammed together with stuff which Christine McVie had been writing for whatever the next Fleetwood Mac album would be. It wasn't actually conceived as a piece of alchemy, but you put those two sets of songs together and it really clicked. That album had completely reinvented Fleetwood Mac. It introduced them to a whole new audience, people who'd never really heard of them before. As far as the 5 million people were concerned who bought that album in the USA, 4,750,000 of them had never bought a Fleetwood Mac record before, had no idea who they were. It was like a fantastic debut record, and all because of this sheer fluke of having run into this bunch in a studio where he was there for a completely different reason and thinking, why not invite them along? We need some singer-songwriters.
Fleetwood Mac album, and in fact, it's interesting that they called it that because it's like a restatement of what they're doing, because the first album was also called Fleetwood Mac, but everyone's forgotten about that by then. The Fleetwood Mac album just contains these fantastic tunes. I mean, the most memorable, presumably, is Rhiannon, which was just sort of Stevie Nicks' showcase, and it's kind of, it has all of the elements that you associate with Stevie Nicks. You know, you can see the white diaphanous kind of dress swirling as she's singing it, and it's sort of cod mysticism, and it's just a fantastically addictive tune.
She was the woman to make their popularity go through the roof because she was really pretty, this doe-eyed little blonde, but she had this strange, ragged voice that you wouldn't have expected to come out of this little doe-eyed blonde, and she was conspicuously imperfect. She too was around 3 feet tall, wore these gigantic boots to try to make herself look a normal height, and I think that probably endeared her to an awful lot of women.
The biggest hit from the White Album was Rhiannon, which was Stevie Nicks' take on some Welsh witch, I believe. But it was a lovely song. There's a great guitar part in it, and of course it gave her a real chance to show off on stage, because during that winding guitar part, or slightly mysterious solo that Buckingham plays, she just twizzled around and danced like some sort of ballerina on stage, which hadn't really been seen before, I don't think.
Rhiannon had the real strengths of, it had her peculiar sort of beseeching voice. The voice had a real personality. This is something which Buckingham Nicks brought into the band, a real strong songwriting personality, which again is brought out the personality of Christine Perfect, or as she had been, Christine McVie then, is that she started writing even stronger songs because there was a little bit of competition. There's something to bounce off. There was these guys, Buckingham Nicks, were really good harmony singers. If you've got good harmony singers in a band, that means you can actually enrich the harmonies of your own songs.
They'd got the perfect sound by now. It was like they'd honed down all those other records that they'd been making earlier in the 70s to the quintessence of what it was. And it sounded perfect on FM radio in America. It really worked. And it was an American success that drove that incarnation of Fleetwood Mac.
The band, though they didn't know it upon the release of Fleetwood Mac, the White Album, were about to go into a kind of a personal meltdown. All the core people had survived thus far. You know, all the lunacy came from the people who came and in the end went. But with the growing success of the White Album, which they toured and toured and toured, they put more and more pressure on themselves because they weren't getting a break from themselves at all. Is that they were on the road all the time, the sales were climbing, they thought, finally, this is it, we've cracked it. And so absolutely, at the moment, when they should be thinking about relaxing, is that the tensions became too much. They were living in each other's pockets.
I mean, the point about the Rumours album, of course, is by now, you know, the group is really splitting up in their relationships, not as a working unit. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks have split up. John McVie and Christine McVie are splitting up. Mick Fleetwood is splitting up yet again with his wife. So songs like, you know, Lindsey Buckingham's "Go Your Own Way" is absolutely, you know, it's a heartfelt tune. So you can, and it really rings out, and it's also a great rock and roll song.
You can go your own way.
best song I always thought was Go Your Own Way. Now, you're not quite sure whether this is Lindsey Buckingham telling Stevie Nicks to go her own way. It may well have been, because he'd realised then that their relationship was on the skids.
It's about what was happening with the band, is that they're saying goodbye to each other in terms of the romantic, the marital relationships. They're giving each other permission to move on. But God, it hurt doing so. Hence the song Go Your Own Way. It's a song which anybody who's been around the block romantically a couple of times can identify with straight away. This is the very essence of adult-oriented rock. It ain't about teen love anymore, because teens aren't like that. When you break up with somebody when you're 16, you don't really say go your own way. You're not feeling like that. But when you're 25 or 30, that's what you are feeling. And those were the people with lots of money to spend on albums, and they were the millions who bought Rumours.
It's such a great rock song, It's Go Your Own Way, and you listen to that one in earphones, and there's tom-toms that are throbbing away in it with Mick Fleetwood. And it's one of those rock songs, it's got one of those lovely one-note guitar solos, he's playing like one or two notes, so he just gets louder and louder and louder, but it's very simple to play. But it's the rhythm section behind it that makes it so good. And it builds, and it builds until at the end of it, everyone's crashing in, go your own way, and the harmonies are coming at you. Just a fantastic song. I loved that song when it first came out. I listened to it on earphones 1,000 times.
I think that's one of my favourite tracks. That's a lovely track. But I mean, Rumours just doesn't have a weak track on it. I mean, you can almost play it if you like a single. The whole thing is good.
The hits, and there are about 5 hits off that album. The hits are spread about among all the songwriters. But Lindsey Buckingham really begins to come to his fore on this record, and you see what a strong songwriter he is and what a strong guitarist and musician.
The standard of songs on Rumours is fantastically high. Part of that is a product because you had 1, 2, 3 really fast first-class songwriters, each at the top of their game at the time. They had gelled. They'd been on the road an awful lot. They knew how to write for each other, to write parts for each other, to get a kind of, if you like, a group sound. For the first time in years, the Fleetwood Mac actually sounded like a group, focused and coherent, yet with enough kind of variety of approach too, so that it didn't just sound, a bit narrow.
By the time they're making Rumours, and there's all the infighting and soap opera going on in their emotional lives, they're following up this hugely successful album, so they're not going to split up. They're older than many people in groups. They realised that they've got to complete this. So, and I think all that, the tension that was obviously created by that, comes out in the songs, and that's why it's one of the reasons it's such a successful record.
I saw that version of the band. I think they'd reached the stage where they arrived in separate limousines and had separate handlers walk them to separate entrances of the stage, and then they would come on, and if they were lucky, they might look at one another. Intense animosity, because even more than most bands who come to detest one another, many of them had been married to many others. So, I mean, that just ups the ante.
And the songbirds are singing like they know the score. And I love you, I love you, I love you like never before.
As a group, really, Fleetwood Mac are kind of a soap opera at this point. I mean, the intersquabbling is fascinating to the world. Everyone's aware of what's going on in the private lives of these people. But the English members seem a little bit bemused by the whole thing, as a matter of fact, and they're tucked away living in LA, living a very comfortable lifestyle, but not that they get to enjoy it that much, because they're on the road all the time. They work really, really hard, and it's very hard for them to follow up Rumours. Tusk, the follow-up album, a double album, takes a couple of years to make.
Rumours was so big, it had turned them into an institution. Whatever Fleetwood Mac did then, like Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or Paul McCartney or the Rolling Stones or whatever, they were right at the top of the pantheon. Is that they would always sell records thereafter in their millions, because the fan base was then so huge and their quality control on the whole was just about good enough that they would never make a complete turkey. And indeed, in the 30 years since Rumours, that's been the case.